Joining me now is Ken Cuccinelli. He's the founder of the Never Back Down Super PAC that is supporting Governor DeSantis. He was also, of course, a top official at the Department of Homeland Security during the Trump administration. Ken, thanks so much for joining Meet the Press Now. So, Ken, Governor DeSantis put out that statement before the charges released. So after seeing the evidence today, Ken, should he change his tune?
So I don't think so. I think that he is on the right track. It's one he's been on for some time. He's stated a more general level. Surely this indictment is nothing like the one in New York. Nonetheless, in the context of Hillary, Obama, Biden having their own document issues, the average American isn't going to see it much deeper than that and sees the bias that takes place not just in this case for bringing it. And mind you, I was a state attorney general. There's a difference between whether you've got someone dead to rights and if what reads out in the indictment is accurate. You know, there's a strong technical case here against the president. That's a different question from whether the case ought to be brought, just like it was in Hillary's situation and as is ongoing with Joe Biden himself. This will put a lot of pressure on the Department of Justice to actually bring the Biden case. But DeSantis is still on the same path he has been on, and that is the de-weaponization of the justice system. And I think that's something that Americans look forward to. And I see him being very consistent on that, and we're happy to echo that here at Never Back Down.
But, Ken, you seem, in your answer, you seem to suggest that this is different from the previous hush money case. Do you think this is a stronger case?
Yes, simply because the New York case, the district attorney there essentially made up a new legal theory to charge Trump with. That is not the case here. These are longstanding statutes, and there was a lot more detail in this indictment for your viewers than the average indictment includes.
If this case is stronger, as you just said, why bring up that it shouldn't have been brought in the first place?
Well, because you still have a situation, this is brought not in by itself. There's everything else going on in our society. And when you have a Department of Justice that continues to show demonstrated bias, they cannot expect to bring a case like this.
So you're bringing up a political argument, Ken.
You asked me a question. I'm answering it. And the American people to see it as being made on an objective basis. And that's what Governor DeSantis is going after hard and fast. And he's made some very firm statements about things he'll do about that, and I appreciate that.
And we do appreciate you coming on here, Ken, and answering questions. But the point I was trying to make, if you think that this is a stronger case, and you bring up the politicization of the Justice Department, but if the facts are there, no one should be above the law, right?
Well, certainly that's the rule of law is a fundamental American precept, and it's been one that's been bent and abused rather badly over the last 10 years by the FBI and this Department of Justice. They're not in a position to simply expect people to view their actions without being as coming through a political lens, and this just continues that path. I do not think the president's supporters will respond to this in the same way they did the New York indictment. I was listening to your conversation about the drama. That is wearing on people. It is going to be a different response. But I do expect you're going to see the same response from Governor DeSantis, and that is a commitment at the general level to get into the Department of Justice and to depoliticize it. That's something that every American should want.
And, Ken, you mentioned the drama. So do you agree with that argument? Do you agree that Donald Trump just has too much drama and should not be the Republican nominee? Because that seems to be the argument that you're making. The candidate that you're backing, though, has not made that argument so explicitly yet.
Well, the way you ask it is sort of binary. I would say that it is an important factor for an awful lot of folks. And I've traveled to a lot of states already, talked to a lot of grassroots folks and grassroots leaders who don't appreciate the drama. This is not a plus for the president. And when you compare it to Governor DeSantis's much more effective governing style in Florida, that is a stark contrast. And it weighs very heavily in the governor's favor with ordinary voters. You've heard of Trump derangement syndrome. There's also Trump exhaustion syndrome, and that's among many of us who have or had supported him.
And Ken, I want to read something from the indictment. The government alleges that the classified documents Mr. Trump stored in his boxes included information regarding defense and weapons capabilities of both the U.S. and foreign countries, United States nuclear programs. The unauthorized disclosure of these classified documents could put at risk the national security of the United States. Bottom line, should he have had those in his possession after he left the White House?
Certainly not. He shouldn't have had, and no president should have any classified documents even after they leave the White House. Bottom line, I think you see a focus here on the national security documents as opposed to all classified documents. That's the only limitation I really see the Department of Justice having imposed on itself in bringing this indictment.
So why can't Governor DeSantis and other Republican candidates say what you just said?
Well, perhaps they will. Honestly, I've read most, but not all of the 49 pages so far. We're all still digesting this in greater detail. I think that that's going to take a little while for that dust to settle. People are going to want to see what happens on Tuesday in Miami. I don't think there'll be new information, but one never knows. I mean, some of this information came out before today from unofficial sources, and it's an interesting question to know. How did CNN get the recording of the president on audio? And those are other questions that, you know, really leave people with concerns of the politicization of this that undermines what on paper might otherwise be a strong case.
And Ken, I know you're with the super PAC backing Governor DeSantis and not with the actual campaign, but
right.
Do you think that Governor DeSantis would pardon former President Trump?
Oh, I have no idea. That's one of those questions that only he can answer. And, you know, that's a long way off. Right. But as your earlier panel talked about, it is a long way off, but there's going to be trials between here and there on a number of these issues, and that kind of drama does not weigh well with ordinary Republican voters. It is not a plus for the president, and having a leader who's already proven, like Governor DeSantis, who doesn't bring all of that baggage, is very attractive to people all across America.
And Ken, I want to ask you something about something that former Vice President Pence said earlier today, that other Republican candidates have said as well, including Governor DeSantis. They've really made a point of saying that they would clean house at the DOJ. Do you agree with that, given that you just said that this indictment is stronger than the previous one? So I understand you have questions about whether it should have been brought at all, but why say that you should clean house at the DOJ if the DOJ did its job here?
Well, let's set this case aside entirely and still point out there are reasons to clean house at DOJ and the FBI because of the 10 years of politicized behavior that I talked about that is now extremely well documented, including lying in courts and lying to the American people by DOJ, by the FBI. There's an awful lot of cleaning out that has to happen. Unfortunately, you would have expected the director, say, of the FBI to do part of that. That's a Trump appointee that he has complained about and that Governor DeSantis has said he would remove on day one. He has failed to depoliticize the FBI, and Governor DeSantis is committing to put others in who will.
Ken Cuccinelli, founder of Never Back Down, the super PAC backing Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Ken, thank you so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.